Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Daily Debate. My name is Ahmed Nader, and tonight we'll be focusing on the COP27, which is set to be held here in Egypt, and more specifically in the resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh in the month of November, as most recently the Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry launched the official account on social media for the COP27 and had the first post on social media, more specifically the Facebook page, regarding the efforts of Egypt in preparing for the COP27, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, which will be taking place at the end of this year. And tonight I'm honored to be having with me in the studio to be shedding more light on this important topic and this important event, which is set to be held in Egypt, in Africa, in the Middle East and in the Arab world for the first time, is Dr. Mohamed Bayoumi, the Assistant Resident Representative of the UNDP. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Anytime. First of all, we'll be starting with the top story for today on Sunday, and it comes through the presidential activities of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. President al-Sisi met on Sunday with Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli and a number of ministers on the strategy for the new and the sustainable energy. Presidential spokesman Bassam Radi added that President al-Sisi met with the Minister of Electricity and the Renewable Energy, Dr. Mohamed Shakir, Minister of Petroleum and the Mineral Resources, Engineer Tariq Al-Mulla, Minister of Planning and Economic Development, Dr. Hale Al-Said, and the Minister of Finance, Dr. Mohamed Maid. Radi said that the meeting dealt with following up on the state strategy for the new and the sustainable energy, as well as the electrical feeding for the national development projects. In this context, the production of the electricity from the new and the renewable energy that depend on wind and solar energy were presented in cooperation with the private sector companies and partnership with the foreign expertise. This comes within the framework of the country's strategy for the integrated and the sustainable energy, which aims to reach 42% of the renewable energy by 2035 in order to make good use of the Egyptian resources. With regard to the utilization of the wind energy, efforts to increase the capacities generated by the wind turbines were reviewed in order to maximize the use of the wind energy. President al-Sisi directed the strengthening of the national plans for increasing the amount of renewable energy supply for the development process. Dr. Mohamed, before going out for the first report of the daily debate for tonight, the meeting that we are focusing today on our top stories for the daily debate for tonight, it comes through the same topic, renewable energy, the political leadership's intention to be focusing and concentrating on the green energy for the future. How do you see the plan, the vision of the political leadership of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in this file in specific?
It's my pleasure to be with you here today.
Anytime.
Obviously, green electricity and green energy in general is one of the main topics that will be discussed in the COP27.
Yes.
Not only for Egypt, but for the whole world. There has been great advancement globally in the technologies related to renewable energy. And this was really pushed and driven by the mobilization for the finding a solution for the climate change. And we have witnessed a great advancement in the technology over the last years, something actually that reflects the ability of humans to face problems, and when the international community is determined to solve a problem, we have seen the results. I can tell you, for something like the solar energy, generating electricity from the photovoltaic or the solar panels, we have witnessed a decrease in the prices between the year 2010 to 2020 by about 90%. The prices went down by 90%.
Yes.
So we're paying today like 10% of what we used to pay 10 years ago for this type of electricity. 2010, everybody would have told you, I mean, you know, solar energy is extremely expensive and generating electricity is extremely expensive.
Yes.
Today, it is the cheapest source of electricity on Earth. And obviously, this is leading and driving the energy transition globally. And Egypt is one of the countries that benefit and contribute to the development of this technology. We have the big solar power station in Aswan, and now big projects related to wind energy, which also the prices has went down. And thanks to the countries that were able to buy electricity at a high rate at a certain time over the last 10 years, they are those who will be able to contribute to the driving the prices down, increasing the research and development in these technologies that led to what we see today. The prices, I mean, you know, as I mentioned, is the lowest, and this opened opportunities for the transition to green electricity globally. What we have seen in this respect in Egypt over the last 5 years was really a big jump actually in the technology. Big projects has been implemented by the government, but this is not the full story. The story have another side, which is the role of the individuals in energy efficiency and small-scale renewable energy technology, which is picking up as fast as the government is doing the big projects. And both tracks, I mean, you know, will lead to the energy transition that's hoped in Egypt and globally.
We do have a number of resources to be going through the process of going through leading to green energy in the future by 2035, by 2060, in terms of 10 to 20 years. But do we have the means of having more foreign direct investments coming from outside to be investing in renewable energy in Egypt and in Africa?
As far as I can see, this is one of the objectives of the government of Egypt, to attract more investments in renewable energy.
Yes.
And Egypt is blessed, I mean, you know, with the lots of wind and solar, and with the combination of gas, Egypt is positioned to be a regional energy hub.
Yes.
And obviously this will attract more investments, foreign investments in these technologies. But again, this is not the end of the story. The COP27 being held in Egypt, this is a big opportunity for increasing awareness of the individuals and the corporations and the companies and everybody in the civil society about renewable energy and the opportunities that come with the solar energy and energy efficiency as well. And this is open opportunities as well for the individuals to invest in that. It's not only the government. And we have a big story in Egypt that I always like to tell, I mean, you know, in these occasions. It was a project that we started with the Ministry of Electricity around the year 2012 to support the market transformation in Egypt to efficient lighting, energy efficient lighting, which is known as the LED technology, the LED technology.
Yes.
And it was a big story in Egypt, the transition that happened for the individuals who invested into buying these LED lamps. We're talking today about 200 million lamps, LED lamps, that entered the market, I mean, you know, in the order of like 3-4 years, which have induced huge savings in electricity consumption, even beyond the generated electricity from all the renewable energy in Egypt. And this is something, I mean, you know, that went easily, smoothly. It was not government investments, it was individuals, corporates, companies, hotels, banks who invested in the LED technology, which have led to the reduction of the electricity consumption. And obviously, reduction of electricity consumption means less emissions, less consumption of the natural gas, which can be reserved for other purposes, either for exporting as a source of income for the country, or being used in critical uses that doesn't have a replacement at the moment, stretching the period of the reserves for Egypt. Instead of a certain number of years, this can be multiplied by 2 or 3 times, as long as we're able to reduce the consumption of electricity. So this are the opportunities that comes with the investment in renewable energy, not only foreign investment but national investments as well.
Yes, we will be heading to the first report of the daily debate for tonight, and it comes through the presidential activities of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. But on Saturday, the visit of President al-Sisi to the military academy and His Excellency's meeting with a number of students from the military academy, and the remarks made by President al-Sisi regarding the Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip. And as we did see today, the efforts made by Egypt to be having a dialogue between the Israeli side and the Palestinian side simultaneously. We will having more details in the upcoming report about this situation.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi said that Egypt has a positive role regarding what is happening in Gaza by conducting contacts with the Palestinian and Israeli sides. The president's remarks came in the speech during an inspection tour of the military academy on Saturday. At least 10 Palestinians were killed, including a 5-year-old girl, and up to 70 others wounded on Friday in a series of Israeli airstrikes targeting several areas across the Gaza Strip. President el-Sisi also reviewed Egypt's position pertinent to foreign policy and issues related to the Middle East and confirmed Egypt's unwavering position on the Renaissance Dam. The president tackled efforts of the Egyptian state in the social protection projects related to the Decent Life projects. President el-Sisi referred to the importance of awareness and directing societal thought to protect Egyptian national security. On the presidential initiative of the Decent Life, President el-Sisi explained what the country currently is doing to provide comfortable conditions. President el-Sisi congratulated the graduating students for completing their military studies and joining the armed forces as a new generation full of hope and patriotism.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate, and I'm honored to be having with me in the studio for tonight Dr. Mohamed Bayoumi, the Assistant President Representative of the UNDP, as you are meant to be working a lot with the development process of Egypt and the region in general. I was just asking about Haya Karima, the Decent Life initiative, before focusing on the climate change. How do you see this initiative?
I would look at it, from my area of specialization,
yes,
from the environmental perspective. We're talking about an initiative that have combined mitigation and adaptation, actually. Mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation, obviously, these are the climate change terminologies that we usually use. Mitigation means reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Adaptation is coping with the changes that are taking place, obviously, and we cannot prevent, so we have to do something about minimizing the negative impacts of climate change. So I see Haya Karima as a model for climate change mitigation and adaptation, both, in one program. In the sense of increasing the access to energy for rural Egypt, has to follow a different model that we used to do before. As I mentioned, now we have a cheap source of electricity, that was not available in the past. So probably we have to follow a different model in introducing the energy to the rural areas, depending more on decentralized systems, renewable energy systems.
Can it be done, or it would be very expensive?
Again, this is what I tried to say at the beginning. This is the perception, that we used to have about solar energy, that's quite expensive. The reality that we have today, that the securing electricity from solar energy is like 10% of the cost that you can get from thermal power stations. It is the issue that we are having a different model that we are not used to, and we need to promote. And yes, it might be expensive for the investment for the rural local communities in rural areas to invest in solar energy, but for the government today, we have to think twice, before investing in extending traditional cables and transformers vis-a-vis and extending the electricity from the large power stations to reach the rural areas, vis-a-vis expanding on the other side of the grid with decentralized systems, small-scale systems.
It would be cheaper than the other process.
I believe it is. We need to study. We are in a changing world right now. Technologies are developing as we speak. And what used to be in the past impossible or very expensive, today is becoming possible and cheap. In the past 10, 15 years ago, you would have sit with the electrical engineers. They would tell you there is nothing called electricity storage. Electricity now is stored, and there are countries that are building big power stations based on batteries. Obviously, thanks with the advancement of the technology of electric cars that has driven the technology of the batteries, we have witnessed a significant decrease in the prices of batteries. And again, renewable energy like solar panels combined with batteries, you can have 24 hours access to electricity in a completely different model that is competitive in the price at the economic level, at the government country level, rather than the individuals.
Doctor, you mentioned that there are some negative impacts of the climate change that we can do nothing about. What are those impacts?
The extreme weather events is the first thing that we see today. And again, when we are talking about Hayat Karima in the perspective of rural development, now we see the canal lining programs and the flood protection programs. All of these are meant to be climate change adaptation measures that can minimize the impact of climate change. Extreme weather events are coming, with bad news, but it's not the only thing that we have. We have impact on the variability of water resources. We have impact on the agricultural production. We have impact on the low-lying lands in the Nile Delta. And all of these impacts, unfortunately, has to be faced with some investments in protection of the property and human lives from being affected and lost.
Yes, if we return to the main topic for tonight, the COP27, the climate change conference that will be taking place in Egypt in Sharm el-Sheikh. What is the importance of having it for the first time in Egypt, in Africa, in the Middle East and in the Arab world here?
It is the first time to hold it in Egypt, but it's not the first time to hold it in Africa, actually. It has been in Africa a few times before. But the significance, obviously, that this is Egypt is hosting this event on behalf of Africa. This is the largest global event now that we have. It's a political forum in the first place. It is an event that have countries, negotiating about how the world is going to face climate change in terms of mitigation, adaptation. It's an ongoing negotiation process between developed and developing countries. About the historical responsibility, who should pay for adaptation, who should pay for mitigation, and this is the track of negotiation that goes, all the time in the successive COPs. Obviously, it's a challenge for Egypt, a big opportunity for Egypt to show the ability to handle the logistics of a big event like this one, as well as to move forward the negotiation and agreements between developed and developing countries in order to have a step forward in the pathway of fighting climate change. As I mentioned in the introduction, we have witnessed, great development in terms of technologies related to climate change mitigation. We hope to see more on the adaptation side, which is a more important issue for Africa, that they need access to water, they need access to agriculture production, which is going to be affected by climate change. But and these are big risks facing Africa on one hand, but on the other hand, the climate change is coming with some good news to Africa, some opportunities, as I mentioned, renewable energy technologies with cheap prices, access to electricity. We're talking about more than 600 million people in Africa that lack access to electricity. Now with the advancement in this technology of solar energy, they might have the opportunity to have a cheaper access to this electricity that they never used to have, they could not afford in the past. And all of that, has to be voiced in an event that is being held in Africa, and in Egypt has a responsibility to voice all of these concerns and opportunities that come to Africa.
Is Africa the worst affected continent by the negative impacts of the climate change?
For sure. This is a well-known practice that the underprivileged and the poorest, globally, are the ones who are most affected by climate change. In developed countries, they don't have much impact related to climate change. They are able to face it. I'm not saying that they are completely safe out of it. We see what's happening in Europe these days about the droughts. Countries like the Netherlands and France, are announcing a water shortage status and preventing people from using the water in washing their cars and washing streets. We have never heard about this incidents, before in Europe, and this is going to be more frequent, is going to be seen in Europe. So there are impacts on the developed countries, but they are well equipped and they are able to manage these impacts. In developing countries, the situation is different. It needs large investments for infrastructure to be able to face these impacts or reduce the casualties and the economic losses. And obviously, this is one of the points of the negotiation all the time between developed and developing countries, that the loss and damage issue in between developing countries that are asking developed countries to bear the consequences of the climate change and pay, for securing and preventing the loss of life and property.
In the past 8 years under the tenure of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, we've witnessed trillions of pounds, billions of pounds at least, being invested in infrastructure. Does this do well to the economy? Does it do well to the environment? Does it do well to be fighting against the negative impacts of the climate change, or vice versa, it gets the situation worse?
Obviously, investment in infrastructure in Egypt was covering lots of aspects. From my perspective, from the environmental aspects, obviously the large road network have reduced emissions from the transport sector. When it is coupled by the expansion in the electric mobility in terms of public transportation, like the underground and the monorail. Obviously, public transportation, normally when we are talking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we are thinking about renewable energy and energy efficiency only.
Yes.
But the transport sector, is one of the big contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, and reducing the emissions from the transport sector through the concepts of sustainable transport is meant to be through public transportation, like as I mentioned, the light train that we see, more of underground systems, more of the monorails. This is are going to be very effective in reducing greenhouse gas emissions by convincing car owners to shift more to public transportation. We see now public transportation of different services bus system in the streets of Egypt. It was not the case beforehand. There was kind of a certain image for buses, public buses. Now this is being changed by introducing high quality service bus, more expensive, but it serves a certain segment of the society, that can leave their car and use the public transportation. On the other hand, when we're talking about the transport sector, we also promote the so-called non-motorized transport, means more of walking, have more pavements, that allow people to walk and using bicycles. And again, we have seen President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi yesterday cycling, sending the message that this is one of the means of using, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Investment in infrastructure have covered canal lining, and I mentioned this is an important issue for reducing water losses, which is an adaptation measure. So investment even in the large power stations that we have seen coming with higher efficiency, which is reducing again greenhouse gas emissions. So obviously the modern infrastructure contributes significantly to climate change mitigation and adaptation alike.
What are the negative impacts of climate change that could be hitting Egypt in the future?
We can talk about the present. We have seen the extreme weather events and how it's affecting, a city like Cairo, which has been hit by several times, by heavy storms, and this was not normal actually to see in a city like Cairo, and obviously this requires, changing the infrastructure. We're talking about heavy rain events that come with a significant amount of water that goes beyond the capacity of the drainage system, the design capacity of this drainage system. So this is the starting point that we start to see right now. We see in the north coast of Egypt very strong storms and sea surges during these big storms that's affecting, the coastal cities. And you speak to somebody in Alexandria, and they know that they have a certain period of extreme weather events that now it's non-stop, and the one event goes into the other, and the events, the extreme weather events are becoming even stronger. Unfortunately, we are expecting to see more of these. Obviously, the Nile Delta, being a very low-lying land, is vulnerable to this coastal flooding. We are working now as a UNDP with the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation on having low-cost techniques for dike systems to prevent the water from entering into the low-lying lands in the Nile Delta. This has been extended over 70 kilometers of the dike system, near completion right now in 5 governorates, 5 coastal governorates in the Nile Delta. So there is a lot of work, that's taking place in order to reduce the impact of climate change, as well as working on the other side, again, for early warning systems, which can give messages to people what to expect, during the extreme weather events, which can reduce significantly losses, casualties, and property loss. If you recall, in March 2020, we have this big extreme weather event just before the lockdown for the COVID, and actually I was impressed by the arrangement that was taken by the government at this time. They offered the Egyptians, a day off on a Thursday. I recall this very well, which have significantly reduced the amount of casualties, that could have been exposed to this extreme weather event in this day.
Egypt would be the voice of Africa, as you've mentioned, Doctor. What are the messages that Egypt will be sending out on behalf of Africa and the Middle East during the COP27?
There are 2 main messages actually that I'm expecting that Egypt would go for. Actually, is the promises of the developed countries for climate finance that has never materialized. This came with the Paris Agreement in 2015, the $100 billion per year to be spent on climate change, which so far it didn't happen. So this is important again for Africa to start to mobilize the needed resources for fighting climate change. This is on one hand. On another hand, as I mentioned, Africa believes that adaptation is more important than mitigation, expecting the worst to come. We have seen the impact of the Ukraine war, how it is affecting the food, global food security, and unfortunately this is a kind of simulation that can happen due to extreme weather events that can reduce crops and put the whole global food security in jeopardy. And obviously this is the time those who have the money, more money, will be able to buy the food. Those who have less money, they're not going to be able to get the food. And this type of adaptation measures need to take place, which are important for Africa in order to ensure food security and human safety out of the climate change. But on the other hand, as I mentioned, I always see opportunity for Africa in order to increase the access to energy, which is Africa is deprived from. And obviously access to energy comes with opportunities for economic development and initiating businesses, which they are not able to do in the absence of electricity or clean energy. And as I mentioned, there's going to be a different model for accessing to electricity. It's not going to be the big national grids that used to be in the past. Probably it's going to be mini grids depending on decentralized renewable energy technologies with battery and electricity storage.
How would you assess the awareness campaigns that we can see on television nowadays regarding the COP27 and the importance of fighting the negative impacts of the climate change? Do you think it would be getting the needed results from the people, not just the officials and the laws?
I hope so. This is an opportunity, as I mentioned, to increase awareness, changing lots of perceptions about renewable energy and energy efficiency. As I mentioned, the Egyptians have embarked on buying an expensive LED lamp when they were convinced that this is a good investment and they knew the return on this investment.
Yes.
There is a lot of these technologies that are developing right now. I mentioned the small-scale solar panels, PV systems. Now they are very cost-effective for a certain segment of the society with a certain electricity consumption. I argue that they are very cost-effective for government investment instead of the traditional system for securing electricity. All of these opportunities are coming as we go. We need to monitor and follow up on the technologies. We have to be open and change our perceptions that we used to have in the past about expensive renewable energy. Yes, there are expensive technologies that are getting cheaper and cheaper all the time as we go. There are solutions that were never available beforehand. We have to keep an eye on these solutions because we need to do the shift and to do it quickly, not only for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but for the own benefit of energy security and benefiting from the cheaper sources of electricity and energy that can offer, again, economic development opportunities.
Egypt has a model for sustainable development by the year 2025 to be reaching about 50% of green projects and about 100% of those green projects by the year 2030. Is it attainable, in your opinion, or is it too ambitious?
I think it's attainable. I believe it is attainable. I mean, as I mentioned, technologies are developing quite fast, and with this development in the technologies, we need to be fast in adopting these changes and accommodating the new changes. The issue of green projects, it's a matter of sustainability. It's not a matter of only contributing to a global crisis. As I mentioned, these green projects come with opportunities that we have to capitalize on. We have to face the future and prepare ourselves to the future with a different development model from what we have today, not only in Egypt, but I'm talking globally. And it is the clever countries which is going to invest in the technologies of the future. In particular, if I'm talking about infrastructure that's going to continue for 30, 40, 50 years from now, I cannot do the business as usual. It is in the favor of the governments and the countries to shift, to the green projects for improving the economics, as well as reserving the resources for the future. Everybody knows now the main source of problem for climate change is attributed to the dependency on fossil fuel and burning fossil fuel. And this was the model that we used to have in the past. We reach a level today that the whole world or the globe is not able to accommodate the waste generated from this fossil fuel. And we have another fact next to it as well, that not everybody on this earth, the 7 billion plus people, will be able to have access to electricity using thermal power stations, because we don't have oil. I mean, that's sufficient for all of these people.
Yes.
So the shift is important for the next generations to be able to continue on Earth. Yes, climate change was a catalyst that pushed everybody, to find the solution. And as I mentioned in the introduction, the solution was found in an amazing speed, and still technologies are developing as we speak. We hear about Europe is going to ban using traditional cars, and all is going to be electric cars by 2035. The technology is not commercialized today, but technologies are commercialized as we go. And as we go, we're going to see the shift is happening at a very fast speed. And I assume that this is going to be the case in Egypt by setting this ambitious target for 50% of the projects to be green. This is a matter of survival. And it's not a matter of doing something to please others. This is the matter of the next generations who have to find the way to be able to live and benefit from the resources that we have today, not to abuse it and leave them with a polluted planet.
Doctor, you mentioned the fossil fuels, and I would like to ask about what is going on nowadays. Do you think that is the case of the economy against the climate, preserving the environment and the economy versus having more money to spend? Is this the case now?
I believe this used to be the case in 10 years ago.
Not now?
Not now. As I mentioned, there are cheaper sources of electricity. Wind and solar are cheaper than thermal. This is a fact.
But are the investors willing to be pouring money into it?
Definitely,
and getting money out of it as well?
Yes, we have seen Egypt changing its energy plan over the last few years. The establishing the coal-powered power stations is cancelled, and now it's replaced by wind. And this comes, yes, with an impact, positive impact on the environment, but it comes with economic benefit as well. We don't want to forget that. So the argument of development against the environment, I believe that this is an old argument. As I mentioned, it is the clever countries today that are going to pursue a different model for development than it used to be in the past. And the opportunity is more available for developed countries than for developing countries than developed countries. Developed countries is difficult to change their systems, which existing systems. It's quite hard. They are working on it, but it's not easy. For other countries that are still missing the infrastructure and they're building it, for sure they have to do it in a different way. They're not going to go for the old traditional systems. It's more cost effective to invest in the technologies of the future, which are developing. I'm not saying that they are having the 100% solution for the existing situation, but things are developing as we go.
Recently, Egypt has had the first offering of the green bonds of about 750 million American dollars. What are the green bonds?
Green bonds, I mean, comes with it's a financing mechanism for entities or corporations or individuals who want to invest in green projects. And as you started the discussion about the infrastructure projects that Egypt is building right now, as long as it goes, I mean, in line with being green, like we discussed, I mean, public transportation systems. I mean, it's always a green project to have a public transportation system that reduces the use of the individual cars. So this type of projects is attractive means of finance. And there are financiers who would like to invest in this type of projects, and it's a way of mobilizing resources. As I mentioned at the beginning, greening the economy is one of the means of attracting more investments for a technology that it will take you to the future.
In Egypt nowadays, the renewable energy sources represent about 20% of the energy mix that we are having in the country nowadays. But we are aiming to be heading towards the 40 or 42% of the energy mix. How do you think this gap could be filled?
This is a very good question, actually. As we see, I mean, countries announcing that they're going to be carbon neutral by 2050, 2060, they don't have the technology that allow them to do this. But there are projections for the technology development which will allow this to happen. I believe that there are big opportunities today in Egypt in solar energy and wind energy, unprecedented opportunities. And as I mentioned, and I always repeat, it's not only government investments, it is the responsibility of everybody. Those who have factories, who have hotels, they can depend more and more on renewable energy, and we will see this hopefully in Sharm el-Sheikh. There is lots of work that's being done right now on using more of solar energy for generating electricity before the COP, and there is a project that we are starting as a UNDP with the Ministry of Environment to have the model set for a green city in Sharm el-Sheikh, which will open hopefully the floor for the path, I mean, for other sectors and the rest of the country to start to do the shift. I think that the target is realistic. We don't have all the means of technology today, but it will come. We hear now the talks about green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is not a commercialized technology. It's extremely expensive, but this was the same argument about solar energy 15 years ago, and everybody was reluctant to invest into it because it's expensive. But with the international community establishing programs to promote the technology, as I mentioned today, we have the cheapest source of electricity on earth is from solar energy. No one would have imagined, I mean, that we have these prices for electricity generated from solar energy like we have today in Egypt and globally. And this will happen with other technologies as well.
Doctor, you've stated that the economy is not in a war against the environment or the negative impacts of the climate change. In fact, it is going hand in hand nowadays for the same purpose. But on the other hand, Africa, how do you think they could be applying the rules or the laws that will be implemented after the Glasgow summit and after the Sharm el-Sheikh COP27 with all the economic hardships that they are going through as well?
Yes, Africa is a different story. When we are talking about energy transition globally, this is not applicable to Africa because there is no energy in the first place. So the challenge for Africa is to find energy which is cheap and green and not polluting. And as I mentioned, these solutions are available today. So financing is extremely important. The technology and capacity in Africa to be built to be able to utilize this technology is extremely important. And Egypt is very well positioned now, I mean, to assist Africa in the development of the renewable energy, in particular solar energy. The Egyptians are now having great experience into it, and the experience is building up. It's amazing now the number of companies and private sector companies that are working in this business. Yes, they have been struggling for some time now. They are harvesting the fruit of their struggle, I mean, over the last years. And I think Egypt is very well positioned that it can provide assistance to Africa with the new models that we're talking about. Mini grids, not big national grids for electricity. Solutions are different, and these need to be tapped. Egypt has the capacity, the human capacity, and finance can come from international agencies. Hopefully that we have a different model for development in Africa that is new.
Yes, Doctor, heading to the second report of the daily debate for tonight, and it concentrates on the Facebook page of the COP27, the first official post made by Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, the head of the COP27 for this year, or the summit in Sharm el-Sheikh in the month of November, on the Egyptian efforts for preventing the negative impacts of climate change on Egypt and in Africa. We'll be having more details on this post on Facebook page in the upcoming report.
Foreign Minister and President-designate of the UN Climate Change Conference 2022 COP27, Sameh Shoukry, made his first post earlier last week on the recently made official social media account for COP27. Shoukry called in his message for swift action to address climate change. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs had announced on Wednesday the launch of the official COP27 Facebook page. In his first post, Shoukry said that in those uncertain times, it was obligatory to act swiftly to ensure that climate action remained on top of the international agenda. He added that the current state of affairs should not be taken as a pretext to backtrack on previous commitments, especially those related to supporting developing countries. Earlier in May, Egypt also launched the official website of COP27 and revealed its official logo that it designed to represent the unique cultural identity of Egypt and Africa, according to the Egyptian Foreign Ministry. Egypt has repeatedly highlighted ambitions to build on the Glasgow COP26 outcomes and support global efforts in mitigation and adapting to climate change during the conference. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has repeatedly vowed that Egypt will spare no effort to move from the stage of commitments and pledges declared by the state to actual implementation of quick and tangible measures.
Welcome back. You're still watching the daily debate. Dr. Mohamed, Bayoumi, we have spoken about Africa and the negative impacts of the climate change on Africa and on Egypt more specifically. But on the other hand, the big countries that are responsible for what is going on in the world today, like China, the US, the West in general, how do you think they are responsible for what is going on in terms of climate change, and what are the things that they could be doing in the near future to prevent it?
This is a very controversial issue, actually. The world in the negotiations is normally divided between developed and developing countries. And obviously, the developing countries are putting all the blame to developed countries that they are responsible for the climate change because of the historical reasons that after the Industrial Revolution.
Yes.
But the developed countries have a counter-argument as well, that now the developing countries collectively are producing greenhouse gas emissions more than what we see from developed countries. So the counter-argument state that if developed countries stop emissions today, the climate change is going to continue with the contribution of developing countries' greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a very tricky question, and this is very difficult negotiations between developed and developing countries. It will continue. As I mentioned, part of it, I mean, that developing countries are asking, I mean, rightly, for compensation for the damage that had happened due to climate change. And this conversation and debate is going to continue. I hope that there's going to be some improvement and milestones to be reached in this discussion. But this is a track, I mean, for the negotiation. There is another separate track for action and implementation, as we heard in the report, that's taking place and is progressing quickly, as I mentioned, for economic reasons more than anything else. And this is one of the benefits that came out of the mobilization of the interests of governments and private sector in climate change, that we see all of these solutions that were never available beforehand. So they are moving on the other track, as we have seen in Egypt as an example, the development in energy efficiency and renewable energy. But this is a pathway, I mean, that's progressing, and it's progressing in other countries as well. So they will continue to have these two tracks, the negotiation, which is, I mean, justified for both developed and developing countries for their points of argument, as well as the implementation track based on the development and technology, which hopefully we see something similar in adaptation measures like we have seen in mitigation. Mitigation was obviously more important for developed countries, and that's why we have seen more investment in the technology development for mitigation. We hope to see the same for adaptation, which is related to food security and water availability, to have more of technology that can provide us with fresh water or desalination or treating water that can alleviate the impact of the global food water crisis.
Yes, Doctor. Food security, to what extent the negative impacts of climate change could be affecting food security globally, not just on the continental level?
Global food security, I mean, as I mentioned, the Ukrainian war is giving us a simulation. If a crisis is happening in one part of the world that is providing the whole world with a big percent of the global grain production, when there is a problem in this place, the whole world starts to shake now. Mm-hmm. And the same for climate change. We have seen extreme weather events hitting big parts of the world. And again, if this extreme weather event is hitting one of the main producers of food, we're going to see shortage in global market. But if we're able to find other solutions, I mean, you know, for desalinating water or reusing water at cheap rates, like we have seen for electricity generated from solar energy, this will be the savior for the whole world. I mean, you know, that all countries starts to produce its own food without being dependent on the global food market. So we can achieve more of food security like we are achieving now, more of energy security globally.
In your opinion, what are your expectations for the outcomes of the gathering of the COP27?
Actually, the COP27 being held in Egypt is coming at a very complicated political situation globally. And it's coming out of the COVID, like we have seen in the previous year. This has affected the COP26 in Glasgow, the impact of the COVID. Again, but this year we have a different challenge, which is the Ukrainian war. So I'm not expecting we're going to see big declarations like what happened in Paris in 2015, but I'm expecting that there's going to be more movement and progress in terms of financial commitments and implementation, modalities of implementation, which is exactly what the world is looking for right now. I mean, you know, how we can push for the energy transition and push for the more financing for adaptation in developing countries.
Yes, Dr. Mohamed Bayoumi, the Assistant Resident Representative of the UNDP. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
My pleasure is all mine. And this brings us to the end of the Daily Debate for tonight. Thank you for watching and goodbye.